Well, whether we like it or not, finally, the Brexit is here with us, and it is a fact. And then what does it mean for the UK, for the EU, in Korea, as well as the world? We'll talk about that right here in this program, Upfront.
Global concerns have become a reality. Britain held a referendum on whether to leave the European Union, and the result has come out. And the British people voted to leave the European Union. Britain has voted to leave the EU by 51.9% and has become the first member state to leave the EU. The withdrawal took place in 23 years after the establishment of the EU in 1993. Eurozone crisis and conflicts over the increasing number of immigrants have been considered as main causes of the British decision to leave the EU. A huge backlash is expected to take place over the result of the Brexit vote. British Prime Minister David Cameron, who has led the Remain camp, has announced his resignation after the result came out. Global stock markets lost about $2 trillion in value overnight after Britain voted to leave the European Union. Other EU member states have boosted mutual cooperation to better deal with Britain's startling withdrawal from the EU. EU summit was held following the trilateral summit talks between Germany, France, and Italy. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also participated in the Brexit crisis talks and showed his strong will to minimize the damage caused by the Brexit. The Korean government has also paid attention to the expected aftermath of the Brexit and had an emergency meeting to find ways to stabilize the financial market. Britain's decision to leave the EU has startled the global society. And Upfront discusses the backlash over the Brexit and measures needed for the international community to deal with it.
Well, for today's discussion, we have two guests joining us here in the studio. First of all, Jeong Hyeok, professor at Graduate School of International Studies of the Seoul National University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
And Jong-min, professor of economics from Hongik University. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very interesting topic. And what do they call it in American English? Monday morning quarterback, all after the facts. We can talk about all this. But overall, Professor Yu, first of all, your reaction. You wouldn't say you knew this was coming, would you?
Of course not. I was expecting that Britain will remain in European Union, and also personally, I was about to invest some dollar assets
right.
Because after the conclusion was the remain, and then the value of dollar will be depreciated at the lowest point. Then I was about to invest the dollar asset, but now I missed the timing.
I'm really sure you're not the only one in this case.
Yes, right.
So a lot of people are sad in many ways. But Professor Jeong, let's say about a week before the vote, unfortunately, British lawmaker Joe Cox was killed. And the numbers were showing up once again in favor of the Remain campaign. And a lot of us believed, as Professor Yu has mentioned, it will be the Remain campaign's victory. What was your reaction when the news finally came out?
Actually, when I heard the news, and I think right after the day, there was another hidden poll was announced. From the two information, actually, I expected the leave rather than Remain. And all the environment in EU was actually supporting the leave rather than Remain. But the Remain...
What do you mean by that? EU environment was supporting the leave campaign? What do you mean?
The current way of operating EU has some critical fault. And all those facts, EU is now too much controlling. And if you know the origin of how EU is formed in the beginning, its principle of organizing it has two parts. One is...
I think we should get further into those details about the problems of the EU operation and all that. But are you really truly telling me that you actually had someone anticipated that the Leave campaign would win?
Yeah.
Interesting. This will make a very interesting debate today, and I'm very much excited to have these two guests with different perspective right here. But the thing is, the 4% 4% difference between 52 for the Leave option and then 48% voting for the Remain option. So the gap is 4%. But for the Remain campaign, all they needed was, that means like slightly over 2% of the voters here. What does that margin tell us? Professor, in your perspective, any observation on that narrow margin here?
Well, I think that's within some statistic error, I think. So there are many people
You're still denying the fact.
There are many still people who couldn't decide whether to remain or leave, and I heard that still. There are many people who didn't go to the poll because many people, it was just expecting that, we are going to leave anyway because the Congress, the incident that Congressman Cox was shot, and that actually made the environment different, right? So many people were expecting that Britain will remain. So many young people decided not to go to the poll.
Okay. So the Remain campaign might have felt complacent about it because of Joe Cox's death.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's why I think that there is another petition to repoll this campaign, and
I think the movement seems quite serious at this point as we're recording this program here. The movement, as you mentioned, inside the UK to redo the referendum. We'll have to wait and see in a few days that the overall landscape may change overall. But Professor Jeong, going back to your point that you're just about to touch upon, the sentiment behind the Leave campaign here, you mentioned a few of the points, and first of all, I think you mentioned the EU regulation here. But before we do that, one big question in the minds of many observers here is the immigration question. What puzzles many of the observers is that actually the Labour Party itself was behind the Remain campaign, and Labour Party represent the interest of the workers, right?
Right.
So who are these people who are getting angry about the immigration, if not the workers? How do we explain the overall landscape about the immigration question here?
I think it's similar to the typical labor union situation.
How so?
They are trying to protect the incumbents, not the labor class as a whole. So that way, it's not a surprise. And if you need to dig into a little more detail, that we have to understand the industrial structure of the UK economy as well.
How so? Why, does that explain why the Labour Party itself was behind the Remain campaign?
Mainly those Labour Party and the Labour Union, its backbone is manufacturing. However, the manufacturing part is perhaps they have some benefits. At the same time, the losses, it really depends on region, and it really depends on what kinds of class you belong.
I see.
So that way, I think even within among workers, the opinions are divided.
I see.
So you would never expected the one-way prediction.
Then if the workers' situation overall was something that was divided, then Professor Yu, what about the sentiment about immigration-related concern of the security, for instance? How high do you think that was, and how much impact in your own analysis might have that made on the Leave decision here?
Well, that of course, many newspapers said that antagonism on the immigration was the main reason of remaining, leaving. But personally, I think that there is another reason, such as like nostalgia of the British Empire or something of the older generation. Also, there are some bigger contribution or monetary contribution to the European Commission, and then that was regarded as a great burden for the UK.
The hard money question, the contribution to EU budget, in my calculation, in terms of US dollars, about $30 billion US dollars per year. Yeah. And the Remain campaign was saying, well, Leave campaign was saying that money could be used for many different things inside UK, but at the same time, the Remain campaign was saying that actually what we are getting in return is considerable as well. So we're not paying as much of that money. How did that all play out? Was this a really big money that they were talking about in your own view?
Of course, $30 billion is a very big money, but as I know, as you said, also many parts of the UK also get some subsidy from the EU.
Right.
And for example, Northern Ireland get a lot of subsidy. Actually, the subsidy is bigger than their tax, basically. So that's why the regions are divided. Like Scotland will get some more subsidy instead of their tax, but England is different.
Right.
England is paying more because that region is more like there are many factories, and that their industry itself is sort of a structure that's paying more. So I think that's the main reason that some regional difference exists in this referendum.
So regional difference was clear in the outcome of the votes. England case, about over 53% went for the Leave option, while 46 took a side with Remain. But as you mentioned, Northern Ireland, Remain took over 55% of the votes, and so on. So the country was indeed divided. In that sense, Professor Jeong, they're talking a lot about the transition from what used to be the Great Britain into a Little England now. They're very much concerned about possible exit of the Scotland, for instance, from the UK. What is your perspective here? How serious is the situation the way you see it?
They chose to exit from EU, so that provided the rationale for the Scotland to exit from UK. However, I don't think the small England will not be actually England. So in my opinion, they will do their best to keep them as one. They won't let them go.
So aftermath, since the choice has been made, all the efforts will be made to maintain as much of UK as possible, you're saying. But however, in Northern Ireland, for instance, right, they have open border with Ireland, and now Northern Ireland going along, I guess for now they're going along with the UK, and if they exit the EU membership, would that be really complicated to have this open border, one side non-EU, the other one is EU market?
I believe so. It'll be a serious challenge. However, they chose knowing this in advance. So I think for those things that they could have expected, I think they have some preparation.
But Northern Ireland didn't choose this. Northern Ireland actually chose Remain option with a big margin here. So do you see any, Northern Ireland, for instance, I'm just talking about one example here, but it's one region where we have had a lot of negative feelings towards England, during the 80s, 70s, 80s, and so on. So I guess pessimists seem to hold a lot of concerns, while reasonable optimists like yourself are saying it may not be as serious here. We'll have to wait and see. We cannot, foresee.
Because they already made a big movement.
Right. That's true.
They don't want to make it kind of spread within UK.
Talking about the UK politics here, the Cameron has declared that he's going to step down, and now observers are saying Boris Johnson might actually take the next leadership position, but then again, there seems to be challengers as well. And the story doesn't end with the Conservative Party. The Labour Party seems to be also in trouble, because Corbyn, the head of the Labour Party himself, is being challenged for his lack of enthusiasm for the Remain campaign here and so on. Any observations on the UK politics? You're an economist, but as an observer of this whole process, what do you see ahead for the UK politics?
Well, I'm not a specialist in politics, of course, but there's something to say that, for example, the people choose to, politicians, I can say, politicians choose to exit because there's that actually gives them more interest. But I'd like to say that that's actually the politicians have very short-sighted, and if they choose to leave,
Sure.
of course they will get some support from their voters. But in terms of the economic situation or some long run perspectives, there's some loss, a bigger loss in that. So in that sense, the British politician makes a big blow in the long run.
No wonder we saw on the face of Boris Johnson a few days ago, he didn't look very excited because a lot of observers were saying his biggest victory would be just narrow margin victory for the Remain campaign,
exactly.
and then he could have made his name big and then run for the prime ministership next.
Yeah.
That was his plan, but now all of a sudden it didn't look like he actually believed in the victory of the Leave campaign either here. But Professor Jeong, about the exit process now, Lisbon Treaty Article 50 actually dictates what's going to happen overall. What do you see ahead in terms of what the UK has to get done, and in reaction, how the EU might react?
That article is actually a very small thing. It doesn't say much.
Right. It just says 2 years.
Yeah, just not
Probation.
the details at all.
Right,
because
right.
nobody expected such an exit.
Okay.
So I think it's a little hard to expect how it'll evolve.
Right.
But at least one thing that we should expect is it'll be beyond 2 years. Actually, the Cameron himself expected 10 years, and most EU experts are agreeing with Cameron.
But isn't it the case that Article 50 says it's 2 years, so no matter what, after 2 years, they'll have to be out, right?
No, they can agree that it should be extended.
I see. So they
if
can agree.
They can keep extending.
They could agree on extension of
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
So it will not have to be definitely 2 years.
No.
Interesting. So you're saying it could happen, anything could happen after the extension, and it could go on 10 years, you're
Yeah,
saying.
and then that'll be a big punishment for the UK.
Then the EU is saying, right at this moment, however, though, if you want to get out, you got to get out right away because we really hate this situation of uncertainty, right? So are you saying that beyond the words of the EU leadership, actually what EU also would want would be also extension of this kind of process?
For two reasons. The Parliament's head's comments is I think it's political.
EU Parliament?
Yeah, EU Parliament.
Okay.
His comment is political.
Okay.
Maybe to guarantee its strong position against UK. However, if that exit is too easy, like within 2 years,
Right.
You may expect another exit process
right.
because, well, just announce it and wait for 2 years, it'll be done. So to prevent the further exit, I think the optimal strategy for the EU,
Right.
Particularly the administration point of view, not the Parliament's point of view, would make it hard.
Giving the UK as much trouble as possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there seems to be a dilemma, Professor Yu, that I see here from the EU perspective, right? As Professor Jeong has mentioned, politically speaking or administratively speaking, you got to make sure that there will be no followers. In order to do that, you want to give UK as much trouble as possible. But on the economic side, the EU has a concern because if the exit process is as troubling as we see here, then it would mean a lot of negativities for the global economy and the EU economy as a whole, right? What do you see in terms of this balancing the two sides here?
Well, I'm not really sure that there's really some political intention that the negotiation becomes longer. But if I'm sort of a politician of the EU Commission,
Right.
then I'm gonna make it more shorter. So like
Because of the economic interest?
Yeah, exactly, and to stabilize the currency value and make the European Union more stable. So so you said 2 years, right?
Right.
So within 2 years, if negotiation between the UK and the EU is more advantageous to the UK, then I think the negotiation will not be made. I guess.
see. Professor Jeong, however, I'm sure you have a response to this point because, I mean, you know, if they do so, then there will be followers. We are already talking about Frexit, Oxit, or Nexit, all those things. So do you see any a little bit more delicate picture here that they would like to try to navigate through?
They will think about finding solutions. I think here, the negotiation between EU and UK may not be that important. However, I think there is one country that can play an important role, which is US. US does not like the UK's exit at all,
right?
Because it's a big burden for the US from the security point of view.
Because UK has been an important, what do you call it, channel or leverage that the United States could influence the EU through, right?
Right, but there are little two specific reasons.
Okay.
One is, originally the EU was created to control Germany.
Okay, right.
Because that was why EU was created. In the beginning, the Germany kind of caused the two big wars,
right.
And the main idea of France was at the time Germany was like a kind of lagging behind the late industrializer.
Right.
So it's a big instability cause. So let's bring Germany into Europe and integrate Germany into the European system and to stabilize the whole Europe. That was the main idea of EU.
Right, right.
And that US buyed a lot, and then the burden will be spread between UK, France, and Italy, the initial member of EU, although the Britain was not the original member of EU.
Right.
And then that kind of mechanism is broken. So US will not like this kind of unnecessary, long kind of process of exit.
So are you expecting US pressure to make EU's exit
as quick as possible?
As quick as possible?
Yeah, that's what they would do. But
and would the United States seek any kind of compromise between the full exit and then? Okay, but they don't want to have, the United States would not want to see a prolonged, troublesome exit process.
That's not what they want, because that will cause the global instability. That will hurt the U.S. economy a lot.
They're already talking about Janet Yellen they're feeling very frustrated, right, in terms of her post-2008 QE, the management of the global economy that looks like it's falling apart. So I think what you're saying seems to be making a lot of sense. Now switching back to our focus to the UK itself. You know, this is a country that has a long tradition, maybe perhaps the longest tradition of democracy. First country to introduce the parliamentary democracy, a former empire that used to rule the world in a way, and a well-respected fighter against fascism and so on. Now, what's going to happen to this country? And more specifically, as an economist, London as the financial hub. You know, we already hear about considerable capital exit from the city and so on. What do you see in terms of the long-term future? Will this be stabilized anytime quickly, or will this going to be a prolonged process where London as a capital of the European capital of the finance will continue to suffer for a long time?
I guess I expect London will lose its position as a hub, as a financial market. As financial hub, I guess at least many financial institutes will leave the London as their hub. Let me give you some example. You know, like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 200 years ago, the Napoleon built up the blockade between the Britain and the mainland.
Right.
And then in that season, Napoleon did that to separate the trade between the Britain and the mainland, and then mainland countries like Russia and Germany wants to trade with like America or New World via Britain.
Right.
So Britain was the sort of a hub or gateway to go outside. So when the Napoleon blocked the border, the many mainland countries argue about that.
Right.
But right now, London, also Britain, is sort of a function as like a gateway to go inside the Europe. So for example, Korean companies wants to go to London because they want to go into the Europe.
Right, and companies like Samsung has done exactly that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, they use English, but not many countries in the Europe. So that's why they make the legal entities in London. But if they cancel it, if London cancel their relationship with the EU, then London is not going to be a real hub of that.
There will be a considerable impact indeed. Okay, they're looking at. Professor Jeong, I want to ask you a more challenging question about the bigger political perspective or landscape here. A lot of people are relating the Brexit vote with Trump question across the Atlantic and talking about the overall global trend here. The trend against globalization, trend toward isolationism, and ending of the globalization and so on. I mean, we can talk about all these issues for many hours here, but we have to move on to other business issues here. So before we do that, in this big picture, what do you see? Do you agree with the observation that perhaps this means the end of globalization, beginning of the end of globalization, and the back currents back to the isolationism and nationalism and all that?
I think there is a chance because when actually the First World War began, it started from the exchange rate war.
Right.
And this protectionist movement happened within country. So, well, think about the shout of the assassin of the Cox, the Britain first, and the same thing is said by one American, the famous American.
I thought you were optimist.
However,
you're getting pessimistic here.
Well,
history being repeated after a century here.
There is a chance. I am optimist in a sense that I don't give up hope. However, the environment is not that optimistic actually.
Do you say then this is all result of polarization and the negative, byproduct or the result of the globalization?
I think the key part here is two things. One is globalization itself, because with the globalization, the markets are shared. That means when there are shocks, big shocks in any part of the globe, it'll be transmitted to almost all parts of the world. That's why actually we were worried about low oil price, which was a big surprise actually. But that concern was correct. And that means when all markets are shared, it means that each nation is losing its own means of kind of correcting its own economy.
Like losing control, basically. That's why the Leave campaign was saying taking back the control. Right. So the trend itself is quite clear here, and how we're going to manage ahead is going to be a big question for all of us. But before we move on to the next phase of our discussion here, talking more about the market impact and economic impact, let's have a brief summary in our video talking about and describing the immediate impact following the Brexit vote. And we'll be right back after this. Now talking more about the market and economic impact here, let's discuss what has been happening for the past few days. But before we do that, however, Professor Jeong, I understand you have an interesting perspective in terms of the post-Brexit impact on the market and the global economy as a whole. Short-term and then long-term impacts being differentiated. What do you mean by that?
I think from the UK's point of view, it's clearly bad in many ways. As Professor Yu already suggested, it may lose its kind of position as a hub, and trade-wise, it may lose. However, British are very practical people. I think they already calculated. They already took these factors into account, and they think it'll be economically viable in the medium term or the long run.
Is that why Cameron was saying we will survive the exit even before the Brexit vote?
I think so.
Okay.
And I think they're prepared for the exit. Actually thinking about not just this payment to the EU, but in many situations of UK economy, the EU is a big hurdle for the British development itself.
Is that so? Okay.
Yeah. Well,
very briefly, why? Why?
Well,
Because
its fiscal burden blocks many reforms that UK wants to do.
The pro-market reforms?
Yeah, pro-market reform or the education reform, all kinds of reforms are blocked by this fiscal burden. That's one. And the other one would be, well, its leadership. Basically, the main benefits of the EU is going to Germany. So the France is a political winner.
The regional leadership you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
but will will UK outside of EU actually get to retain or increase their impact on European community as a whole? Is that what you're saying? If they want to exercise greater power, they should stay inside, no?
Yeah, if they are in EU, they wanted leadership.
But they didn't get it.
Yeah, they didn't get it, so they decided to exit.
And would they give them greater global leadership, relatively speaking?
I don't think
EU?
so. That I don't think so. That's why I use a term like a medium-term economic gain.
Right.
Was clear for them, but the true long-run gain, I think they
Greater
lost
freedom?
a big thing.
But do they gain greater freedom then?
Maybe.
Do we choose a trade-off?
But however, what was the main vision of EU? It was political stability.
Right.
They should face this kind of political instability issues perhaps in the very long run. And it'll be prolonged. And that's why the main solution to this situation was not exit.
I see.
It was actually stabilizing the root cause.
But that was not addressed, and so we get the second best option here.
Yeah.
Okay. I think this requires greater, longer discussion here, but I think what you just said was a very important addition to the discussion we were having during the first part of our discussion. But for the interest of time, we really have to move on to the next the category of subject, that is immediate impact on the financial market as well as the trade from the Korean perspective and the global perspective here. Let's talk more about the trade side of the impact. I mean, we clearly see the financial side impact in terms as a result of like fear and all that. But trade side, do we see like the global trade kind of shrinking as a result of this, even in the long term? What's going to happen?
So of course, trade in the trade side, even if it's a trade side, we need to talk about the financial market as well, because currency is the sort of instrument to trade.
Absolutely important point.
So right now, I expect the value of pound sterling and the euro will be in a short run depreciated, I guess. And then also the safe assets such as a dollar or Japanese yen will be appreciated. And that kind of volatility, and also the value of currencies of emerging markets will be depreciated, like a Korean won.
Right.
So that kind of volatility or instability will make the world trade will be hindered, I guess. So in Korean perspectives, as you said, maybe if Japanese yen is appreciated, so that means the the policy of the Prime Minister Abe has failed,
Right.
then maybe we may have some opportunity to sell our products at a cheap price in the international
For
market.
Korean
example.
trade, I think we need to talk more with the specific businesses and then company impacts and so on later on. But overall, you're anticipating the downside effect for sure in terms of the global trade. Professor Jung, do you also agree that overall the trade will have to be impacted kind of like negatively even in the long run? Global trade.
I think so. When we talk about trade, and trade and finance are actually the two related things.
As he said, right?
Yeah,
right.
because trade represents the short-term situation.
Right.
Finance incorporates long-run expectation as well.
Okay.
So that way, it's related. Focusing on trade only, but you still have to think about the two things. One is price effect. The other is income effect.
Okay.
The price effect, I mean the exchange rate effect.
Right.
The relative price will change in the globe, so that will change the current trade flows. That effect, from the global point of view,
Right.
not much. Not much.
Because there will be pluses and minuses
Yeah.
and so on. Right, right.
And even for the given countries,
Right.
maybe not much.
Okay, some good
Yeah,
countries
it's a
working.
s-
Okay.
s-
But
small-
what about the income impact?
Income effect is the thing that we really need to worry about. Because of
Because of the
this,
finance?
financial instability will cause the kind of downsizing the investment
Right.
globally, and then that'll cause the global demand down.
I see.
And then their kind of aggregate demand itself may be lowered. That will affect trade a lot.
Okay, that's another the discussion we need more time on. But let's move on to in terms of like the future of EU here, Professor. Frexit, Nexit, Oxit. They're talking about all these exits continuously. But some of the skeptics of those people who are watching this pessimism with skepticism are saying, look, however, Brexit is different from the other countries getting out of Eurozone because Brexit was UK leaving the EU. But when you're talking about France and other countries leaving the Eurozone, like we saw in Greece's case, the exit is not going to be possible, technically speaking. Do you agree?
Well, it depends on the countries. And then, if, for example, France or German, I don't think they will exit from the
Because
euro.
they're the key powers.
Key powers, and they have a bigger share, as I know of, they have bigger share compared to Great Britain in European Union. So that makes them to stay there, and there's no incentive them to leave at this time. So maybe from the perspective of Germany and France, they need to keep the leadership, and they have an incentive to keep other countries to stay there.
Then what about other major economic powers like Netherlands?
Netherlands.
Uh-huh.
Well, I guess they will stay there.
Okay, because their
Yeah.
economic impact will be just too big as well.
Right.
But will there be then EU's effort for survival or holding together that will be coming up in the immediate term, though? However,
I think so.
What kind of forms would you expect in terms of reaction from the EU to try to hold it together before talking about France or Germany getting out eventually?
They put too much regulations and too much economic burden, as I mentioned before.
Okay.
And
Then
that should
retreat
be
of the Brexit? I mean, retreat of the Brussels then? Activism? Is that what we're going to see?
I think so. They should remember what was the principle of keeping the member states together. So their regulation should be readjusted,
Okay.
not to intervene each member state's economic interest. Otherwise, there is a big chance for the collapse of the EU itself. So that's the thing they should do, and I think they are thinking about it. And perhaps that's why the Czech requested under the current leadership of the EU president, it will not happen. So you should step down. So they requested about that.
Okay.
Well, the member states' benefits are clear, actually, particularly the small member states. Economic gains are big.
That's true. They get more than what they pay
Right,
for.
particularly the Eastern and the Southern European countries.
Right.
It's a big shield, and it's a big market for them. Although suppose like Slovakia is trying to make FTA with all the countries in the world, it'll be extremely hard.
So those smaller members, that's what we are seeing here. Then, Professor Yu, they're talking about the EU in retreat now without the UK and so on. Of the future, assuming that EU remains as it is today without the UK, do you agree with the perspective that the EU is not going to be the EU that we've known so far in terms of its economic status, economic power, and so on? Or do you see, even without the UK, EU will continue to be like EU as a major player in the economic scene? What do you see?
Well, in a currency perspectives, already the UK is working as an independent player in a world financial market right now because they have a pound sterling and they have a different, separate central bank, and their central bank is working as their own way. So EU is a different region right now. So in a financial perspectives, there will be no loss from the perspective of EU.
But no critical loss. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. But in a real economy, I think of course the portion of Great Britain is pretty big. So it is inevitable that the EU loses some of its power, I guess.
Okay, I think that's a really fair observation right there. Then, Professor Jeong, the overall landscape of the Europe as a whole, even beyond the boundary of EU, one contentious issue has been the Turkey joining the EU membership. There seems to be some kind of compromise that was made as a result of the refugee crisis recently. But Turkey membership, Turkey coming in, and then Russia kind of trying to balancing with EU and so on. How are all these dynamics going to be affected by the Brexit vote? Is Russia the one who should be very happy about it? See EU weakening and then UK getting weakened, and then what should Turkey think about all this as a whole? Big question here.
Well, Russia, yeah, the direction is right. Russia became a little freed because there's a big backbone. Is kind of one of them is just out.
So it's Putin's time to celebrate.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think that'll benefit Russia a lot.
Economically speaking, because we're all sharing the economics.
Only it'll make maybe perhaps two countries more unhappy, which is France and Germany. The UK's burden will be just shared by these two countries. I think the US will put pressure to make that actually happen. So rather than it made Russia happy, it made France and Germany unhappy.
So going back to the Turkey question, is EU expansion done deal? It's dead. Turkey not coming in now, like with UK out. All this.
I think Turkey will perhaps wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because all these things are so unclear.
It's not a good time for them to join.
EU has enough of its own trouble, so seeking expansion would be a real thing. Okay. We have had enough about what's going to happen in the world and EU and so on. Time to move on to talk about the impact on Korea right after this. as I mentioned, it's time to move on to the impact that Korea will feel and how we are going to deal with this overall development here. Professor Yu, question to you. The different sectors will have different impact, I suppose, but what's your overall observation? Which sectors will be feeling the most heat here in this case?
So, because after leaving, Britain leave the EU, then there will be some downturn of the world economy, so, and then also the Britain is sort of a major funder of the shipping industry. So if they stop their industry, then there might be the greater impact on the Korean industry regarding that point.
That is a really bad news because Korean shipbuilding industry itself is already in deep trouble.
Yes. So that'll make us a lot of trouble, and then especially we are losing our competitiveness, and the world market is going down. That's a horrible news, and also that's a sort of a perspective of real economy, and also there regarding the currency market. So Korean won will be appreciated, but depreciated. So in that sense, many industries that imports the sort of crude oil or some components that from the foreign countries may have to spend an expensive price on that kind of imported products.
I see. Professor Jung, the impact on Korean trade overall, is there some way we can kind of differentiate like the negative impact that will be coming from the troubled EU market as on one hand, and then global market as a separate one? Can we see what's most severe here?
I think the direct effects from the UK and EU will be small.
Even EU side will be relatively small,
yeah,
I think?
As a whole, including UK, just 9% is the export share. So the direct effect will not be that big. However, as I mentioned before, that the global demand slowdown may affect the general Korea's export. That's the concern. And in terms of exchange rate, actually it's mixed because the Korea's competitor in terms of manufacturing, Japan, we are in a much better position.
Because all the money is going into Japan, their currency is appreciating.
Right.
Okay. So,
and US as well, and Europe as a whole.
So auto industry, for instance, would actually have a greater time in the short run because
I think so.
will become competitive?
I think so.
What about semiconductor? Are they caught in between?
Semiconductor, I think it'll favor them.
I see.
Problem is not the trade, though. Again, it's the investment.
I see.
Investment demand. So we have to really differentiate between these two effects, like trade impacts, but the real side, investment and the consumption effects.
In the long run.
Very different. Even for the short run, for the investment, Korean firms may suffer.
So global scale impact coming back to us, and then within Korea as well, investment impact will be there. Then, Professor Yu, there are a lot of concerns already with or without Brexit, even without Brexit, before Brexit became materialized, concern about Korean economy and what we should do in terms of kind of dealing with the slowing growth and so on. Do you see, for example, Korean government actually revising the economic forecast for this year and the next year downwards as a result of Brexit? Here, what do you see in terms of Korea's growth?
Yeah, the Korean government may, just to be safe, I guess, they may lower their expectation of economic growth. And also, my concern is that to stimulate, actually that effect is external effects because of the exit of the Britain. But to stimulate that economy, maybe the government may try to spend more money to boost the domestic market. But actually, the downturn of the economy is from the international market. So spending too much on the domestic market, even if the problem is from the external market, is sort of like a waste of the money, I guess.
I guess saying that shows that you're a little bit on the hawk side, because we know in Korea, hawks believe government has been spending too much money already fiscally. The fiscal side has been overly expansionary. And then monetary side also, the rate is already very low in the eyes of the hawks. So you're sharing with the perspective, we already have too much of money released in the market, and we'll have to do the same again. That causes concern in your mind?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and the fiscal policy sometimes give us a long-run impact, but in our economy, sometimes just spending money just to boost the economy within this year.
Yeah.
Sometimes, usually, it's a waste of our money. I guess.
So indeed, in the big picture, we do have serious concerns here. Professor Jeong, as a wrap-up here, one kind of practical issue here is what Korean government will do regarding the trade with UK. Obama has made his comment before the Brexit decision that United States is going to ask the UK to stand in the end of the line in talking about the new trade deal if they exit the EU here. What do you see in terms of Korea's trading negotiation with UK here? A lot of things are still uncertain, of course, as we have mentioned. But what do you see happening in terms of trade negotiation with the UK as our final point?
We should redo the FTA not only with the UK, but also with EU as well.
Does it? Is there justification on that? Can we say, look, UK is out, we have to renegotiate?
Right, we really need to. Actually, all the market situation was calculated including UK when the EU FTA was made. So, in fact, we can claim compensation.
Oh, I see.
It's a legal possibility. The size, I don't know how much that would be. However, clearly we can ask the UK, you should pay us back because you violated the original agreement.
It's not a monetary payment, though, you're talking about.
It is monetary payment.
It's technically possible?
Technically possible.
I see.
Whether the Korean government will request it or not, it's a separate story, but the possibility is open. And, but perhaps the more important thing is we need to readjust the FTA with EU. That's more important. And we, again, some people say that 1.4% of trade, why bother thinking about the FTA with the UK? That'll be a serious mistake because trade is a link.
Right.
So the 1 point or 2 point doesn't matter. If the partner is a big economy, we should do the FTA.
Then is this discussion coming right away, or do we all have to wait for the next 2 or more years until the smoke clears between UK and EU? Very briefly.
That's the trouble. That's why the EU is trying to extend the negotiation period to punish the UK. I think we should do it after the smoke is cleared.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as our viewers who have joined from all around the world might have just noticed, this is a very challenging subject to discuss here because we need to speculate on a lot of things that will happen down the road in the future and so on. But for that reason, I want to thank both of our guests big time for your wonderful contribution on discussing all these very difficult matters today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we want to thank our viewers once again who have joined from all around the world for this very important discussion. And we promise you that we will continue to talk about these kind of more important issues that matter for the world as well as Korea down the road. And so next time we want to ask you to join us once again for that reason. And until then, this has been Kim Byung-ju. Goodbye.